Well, thanks everybody for coming along. It's a spectacular turnout, amazing. Also, I'd like to say thank you to our main sponsors, Le Masurier, for tonight. Unfortunately, Brian McCarthy, their MD, can't be here. He's in the UK, and he gives his apologies. And thanks also to Creative Island Partnership for being our support sponsors throughout these talks. We've just applied for more funding, so fingers crossed on that front. Emily Allchurch is a Jersey-born but internationally acclaimed artist who creates amazing collages of classical themes mixed together with contemporary narratives. I personally love Emily's illuminated compositions, which can be appreciated aesthetically from a distance, but also reveal fascinating detail close up, often social commentary or very subtle micro details, or just some things that are quite funny. In many ways, Emily's work is a reminder of what we're missing in our newer built environment, and how new places and new architecture are no longer telling us stories or conveying memories, or even saying very much at all. The seemingly endless pieces of Emily's amazing jigsaw puzzles, I think, are an inspiration to everyone interested in creating a more delightful environment. So I'd just like to welcome Emily to Jersey and to this evening.
Well, it's fantastic to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Mike and the AJA for inviting me to be part of this series of talks around architecture. It's great that you invited an artist to participate in this discussion about architecture and placemaking. And for me as well, it's great to have the opportunity to look at my fine art practice and to see how the city and architecture has inspired it, has been my key inspiration over the last 20 odd years. And looking at my whole creative development, it's great to kind of really use the talk to find a way of drawing out key moments and themes in my work. Generally, as an artist, I'm not working to a particular brief, so it's my own ideas which follow as a journey, each one revealing a new story to me, and it follows a linear path. But then there are also key motifs and ideas which keep reoccurring as important motifs, because they're the key things which I think I can use to express my interpretation, my feeling of being in the world as a visual artist. I refer to myself as an artist that works with photography. My images are meticulously made, they're constructed, and they're not taken. And I think that probably comes from my background as a sculptor, in fact. But it has been a huge privilege to have been a full-time artist for 20 years now, and establishing this reputation that I have for my intricate digital collage technique of recreating old masters, paintings and prints from a contemporary perspective. So what I'm trying to do is kind of understand what the original old master was trying to say in his day, but reinterpret it from photographs I've taken of the world around me to communicate a new story, a contemporary story for audiences today. And so for me, it's really important that my work communicates, whether it's in public art galleries and museums or in public spaces. A great joy for me is if my work communicates to people, and I'm so pleased that there are a lot of students here tonight, because it's a way of transferring those experiences to the next generation, which is so important. This is a really good kind of establishing shot for basically what I've been doing for the last 20 years. It's quite an old piece of work now, but it shows how I use the framework of the old master. You might well recognise it. It's based on a painting by Piero della Francesca, but then I'm actually taking my own photographs and transposing it onto that, and then using the idea of a light box to illuminate the image. And for me, finding a very modern way of presenting the work was key. And the idea of the light box really draws the viewer into the work so that you almost kind of get lost within the scene and find your own stories within it. I think for me, it's very important that my work takes a long time to make. So anything from 2 weeks to 6 months. And during that process, that's when the stories and the narrative reveal themselves. So sometimes I have an idea of what it is I want to do with a series or a body of work, but then that changes when events around me in the world change and my work changes to reflect that. And I think that that's a very important part of my practice. I think, the idea that my influence is an exterior influence. It's an inspiration from being in the world and recording an impression of my take on the spaces around me. So, let's have a little drink. So as Mike was saying, it's the details that tell the story, and everything is quite hyper-real and in sharp focus. So you can they almost feel quite three-dimensional. Just to give a little bit of background before I go into various different series I've worked on, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my foundations, really. So, as Mike said, I was born and I grew up in Jersey, and I went to JCG and had a fantastic foundation in art from Pat Miller and Angela Crowcroft, and it's lovely that Angela's here tonight. And basically, they really installed confidence in me to believe that I could be an art student and I could go on to have a career as an artist. As a young woman, that was really important. And I felt very supported by my family and by the Jersey government to undertake my foundation in Bristol, and then I went on to do an undergraduate degree in majoring in sculpture in Canterbury at the Kent Institute of Art and Design. And I guess my time in Canterbury enabled me, it was a safe environment which enabled me to experiment and to flourish. But it was only on moving to London and to undertake my MA at the Royal College of Art that I really found my feet and worked out what it was I wanted to make art about. And really, that was when it was moving to London that suddenly the city became my inspiration. And I quickly realised that photography was actually the most effective medium for me to interpret my experience of the city. So I'm going to start by showing a couple of photographs which show this transition of moving from college. I moved to the East End of London, which was pre the Olympic regeneration programme. So it was a pretty deprived, run-down part of London. And now it's so cool and very expensive. But then it wasn't very desirable, so that's where artists lived. And so I would travel around the streets as I had been for the last couple of years, trying to find my subject matter. And as you can see here, I did a series of work called, there were twilight works. And in each of these, it's about this expanded view. And there was a pull and push between a beautiful time of day, which is twilight, but actually, in actual fact, it's a very dangerous time of day. It's a kind of liminal with light, a liminal kind of time with in terms of the light, and it's when most kind of attacks happen. And as a woman walking in the streets, I was kind of very aware of these things. And actually what I would do is set up my camera, my tripod, at the threshold of where I could no longer walk because I never felt safe. So I'd never walked into that space. So it was all about kind of capturing the areas that you have to negotiate in the city and how you feel, where you feel safe, where you don't feel safe, and the pull and push of the bright lights, which are very enticing. And I displayed them as light boxes, so they really pull you in, but at the same time, there is this kind of sense of danger and no escape route. So I was working on a series like this, and then I was also working at the same time on a series of expanded views, which were in the daytime, kind of derelict industrial spaces. I mean, you can see Canary Wharf though, that really places it. Right in the background, you've just got Canada Tower, and I think the HSBC building just being built. So now, I mean, this is from Greenwich, and the whole cityscape is totally transformed. But at that time, it wasn't. This was an area which you didn't really, it's a bit unsavoury really, you didn't really want to go there. And so what I was doing was kind of playing, heightening the colours, kind of trying to make the water so it looks a bit uncomfortable, slightly contaminated, but again pulling the push thing with the light of the light box pulling you in, but actually the subject matter being quite uncomfortable terrain. But what I was finding was that I was getting frustrated because all the time when I was trying to find these expanded views, I was kind of discounting these wonderful architectural gems that I was seeing all around me. So this was in East London. You expect all the wonderful landmarks and architectural gems to be in West London. But here they were around where I was living, looking a bit abandoned and forlorn and maybe a bit out of place in the modern world. But actually they were built at the time in Victorian times with real civic pride. And they had classical aspirations which perhaps had got lost over the following century or so. And so what I decided to do, actually the catalyst was an invitation to have an exhibition next to the Pantheon in Rome. And I thought, okay, well, I love classical painting, always have done. And when I was walking around, I kept seeing like Stratford Town Hall and Limehouse and areas around there, the canal side. And I kept thinking, well, this reminds me of some of the buildings that you might find in a Claude Lorraine painting. And I thought there was one which was in the Dulwich Picture Gallery, which was of the foot that Claude, Circle of Claude had painted of the Roman Forum. And I thought, well, why don't I just take all these buildings in East London, recompose them into the same composition of the Roman Forum and take them over to Rome and show them in Rome so they actually achieve the aspiration and the setting which they deserved. Anyway, so I did that and completely baffled everyone in Italy, like what's going on. But as soon as I showed them in London, audiences just totally got what I was trying to do because they had this kind of double take. They're very famous works. I can show you one here. Very famous works. This is a Claude painting from the National Gallery. So they kind of saw my work. They said, oh, I know what it is. It's a Claude painting. And they're saying, oh, no, actually, that's from the Brixton Academy, or that's from here, and that's Limehouse Basin, and I know that. So then they were finding landmarks that they recognise. And I think that's what I really enjoy doing, is taking... taking the landmarks or the important buildings for us today and creating a new story. So with these ones, you can see these are the images that as they are. And then when I recompose them, so what I'm doing is making my work. So it's all done using Photoshop. So I take the photographs, I use the original like a map and a guide, and I'm searching, hunting down all the photographs that I want to complete my finished image. And then I have a huge image library and I'm working from them, plucking out the pieces, cutting and literally pasting them into Photoshop. And then I guess it's with a painter's skill that I'm kind of blending and modulating so that it feels like it's a real space, but of course it's a fictional space that I've constructed in the final work. So I did a series of these. So these early works are from 2003 to 2005. And really they were looking at my favourite works from the National Gallery and reconstructing them from the area I was living in East London. So this is a Canaletto, and then my recreation, which is a lot around Limehouse Basin and around Stratford and Newham and all around there. And but you know, I guess there is a sense of humour in the work, I would hope, and so the gondoliers are replaced by this gaggle of geese, and also a lot of the works are empty. So the series was called Settings, and the idea that they are a stage set. They are generally devoid of people, And in a way that can be a bit unnerving and again a little bit uncomfortable. There's lots of surveillance around. But also I saw it as a way of people being able to project their own story into the image by doing that. This shows you how the works were looking at that time. And when I first made them, they were, the light box was quite open. So you can see you get this illumination around it, and it's quite dramatic. And it almost felt like they were on an easel, which seemed to fit with the idea of the old master. This shows the technique that I use. So they're printed on what's called a Duratran. So it's a special photographic paper which is meant to be seen from a light source lighting it from behind. So it has this kind of, you can see it's got a slight plasticky kind of feel, texture. But what I do, I very carefully think about how I present the work, because that is absolutely key. So when I'm presenting them, I have a matte seal over the front, because what I don't want is any distracting reflections. So I want the viewer to feel they can absolutely get lost in the space and explore the space. But this is the process of working with my professional printers in London. And I worked on a whole series of these. So this one, again, so this is the Piero della Francesca. So it's built as a model of an ideal city. So the idea representing the social function of architecture to create a harmonious society. And I knew that this model, which had influenced architecture for centuries, I knew that I would be able to find it from real architecture that I found in the world around me. So split down the middle, the left side is all photographed in West London, but equally the right-hand side is all photographed in East London. So across the board, you know, I could find it on my journeys. This is one of the ones that I made, which actually marked a kind of turning point for me. Up until then, I'd been working with analog technology, so using a film camera, and then so not being able to see really what I was taking. So I'd have the original as my map and my guide, and I'd be taking my photographs. Then I'd be getting them processed, so slide film, E6 film, then getting them scanned. Before then I could even look and see what I had. And it was a very long process. But that was, you know, it took a while for people to make that transition to digital. And as soon as I did get my first digital camera, of course it enabled me to broaden my ambition and the scope in my work. So this marks the departure point. A lot of the time in my work I put little clues to things that are happening in my world, and so this is almost a kind of I'm acknowledging the end of this moment. So here is my old Canon film camera. There's the slide film. So it kind of shows the process of my making, just as in the original painting of Raphael, which Turner painted, which you can see here. It has Raphael in the front with all his paintings and the tools of his trade. So what it enabled me to do was be much more ambitious. Having a digital camera, I could see whilst I was on site, if I had the right angle. Something like this, working on a Tower of Babel, is a motif you will see I keep coming back to. It is a fantastic way to discuss ideas around the city, because it's obviously constructed and it allows for multiple viewpoints and layering of stories. So I've returned to it lots of times. I didn't know that the first time I made one, but I've loved this painting ever since I saw it when I was 18 in Vienna, and it had a huge impact on me. And so once I realised I could be more ambitious, this one, you know, I'm having to work out what levels I'm taking my photographs on in order to capture looking down or looking up. But I could see whilst I was on site that I had the angles that I needed. And it took me a long time to make this piece of work. and I knew I loved the motif. I wasn't quite sure what the story was, but I went with it. But whilst I was working on it, and I was living in London, the 7/7 bombings happened on the Underground and on the buses. And it had a big impact on everybody who was living in London at the time. And it kind of really, there was a kind of campaign about London standing united, and about how I wanted to reflect the different faiths within the picture. So the idea of the, people and the diversity of London kind of coexisting on the tower despite threats to that cohesion. But it did really bring about a climate of fear and a sense of, I was very aware of more surveillance in the streets. So there was a tangible feeling of fear that people had, and I was kind of picking up on that. And so it actually started making me think. When you look here, you can see, so there's Wembley Stadium being built. Actually, what I find now when I look back at my work, that they become snapshots of a moment in time. Here's the sign about London Stands United, which was a campaign in the newspaper. But also just having a plane and a tower is just full of emotion now, and when you have those kind of elements in there. So I was kind of quite consciously kind of constructing that. But what it made me do is think back about Piranesi. And he's an artist that I've loved for many years. I wrote about him when I was on my MA at the RCA. And he was born in Venice, and he moved to Rome when he was 20. And he served apprenticeships in architecture, stage set design and etching. And I think it really shows in his work. Most of the time, he's very well known. So in the 1700s, he's very well known for his views of Rome, which he sold to tourists in the thousands, people on their grand tours. But actually, his own work, his work that really meant something to him, was much more about architectural reform, and thinking about it. At the time, there was a lot of excavations of Roman ruins, and so they were finding all these magnificent buildings, and so he really wanted to champion Roman architecture. And but this particular series that he did, called Imaginary Prisons, are kind of unusual from his other works, but I think they have so much power. And they talk about, they are said to have come to him in the delirium of a fever, but I think they also talk about the state of the world, how he saw it. And I think he was quite disillusioned, because he really wanted to be an architect, but he didn't get very many commissions, which actually probably is for our benefit, because it enabled him to do these kind of fantastic workings of, they're kind of very psychological, as well as of the psyche, as well of architectural space. So they are based on Roman forums and ideas, but they're also very deep and menacing and foreboding, and somehow they spoke to me in that time, and I felt they could have a resonance to an audience today thinking about an experience in the European city, about the idea of Big Brother and surveillance and all of that kind of thing. So I started working not just in London, but I wanted to branch out. So I was working in London, and I did some about Rome, and I did some in Paris as well. So this just shows the kind of working process. So here, this is my image library. So I use the original. I'm taking lots of photographs, hundreds of photographs of things around me, and I'm allowing what I find to kind of dictate my journey. So what I find on that journey ends up filtering into the work, and if I'd gone a different way, I would have found another story. But this is how the work looks, and then I'm working my images onto I'm using the original as a template, and then I'm building and constructing kind of like building blocks on top until I'm finding the pieces of the jigsaw that I can use to reconstruct my vision. And it's about working and working until it makes sense and everything suddenly kind of seems to fit and to feel right. And then I think the story kind of comes through. And this one is, I wanted to take the idea of the kind of metallic feel of Westminster on the Jubilee line. But again, there's this sense, it kind of harks back a little bit to those works that I did about the threshold and twilight and that sense of danger. This is how it looks as a light box. And again, using the light box really is quite a powerful effect of pulling you in, which I do enjoy that engagement and relationship physically that people have to make with my work. With this one, this is another London scene. I wanted to try and capture the kind of weak, wintry light of the kind of London brick, this yellow brick. And in all of them, there are lots of little details. So there's me in the mirror. There's lots of, it's all about signage. It's all about order and control. So kind of looking out, being aware. Everything's, it's a bit kind of, a bit menacing really. And then there are some figures in here, but none of them make you feel more comfortable. They're all too far away to really help you if you need them. So there's kind of a kind of strange environment I'm kind of building. But going to Rome was fantastic. So I think this was the first time I'd let another city kind of inspire me. And what I do, I mean, there are two parts to my making process. And being absorbed in a place, it's a very short, intense time where I'm completely observant. I'm kind of soaking in like a sponge at everything I see around me, and almost going to a whole new place makes that even easier to do because everything seems fresh and new and you're just aware of everything around you. And I love that idea of just being a kind of a witness to all of that and trying, I think what I'm trying to do with my work or as an artist is kind of pick up a vibe, something that's happening around in the streets, how people are feeling, and somehow try and reflect that in my work. And as I look back at works, I realise that's what I'm doing, but I'm trying to do it quite intuitively. So here I am in Rome, and with these works I had, there's a whole mixture going on here. So we go from the very we go from Roman prisons to Mussolini's kind of fascist architecture from the 1930s to Il Corviale, which is this one here, which was actually built to be a modern day prison, and then they decided to make it into social housing. And it's a kilometre long building. And normally I was taking these photographs on my own, but that was a point, that was a threshold. I could not go in there on my own, and I had to have someone with me to go there because it felt really edgy. And also I can't speak Italian, so it was helpful to have someone with me. But generally, part of the process was actually engaging with that sense of fear, and so that would actually come out in this work. It's almost like I'm daring myself to capture the images within which then I work. And in a way, I am playing with the light. I tend to shoot in flat light, and so I'm adding the highlights and the shadows. I'm building all that up in Photoshop, so I'm creating that. And then I went to Paris and made a couple of works there, and very much looking, it goes from the medieval remnants to Baron Haussmann's modernisation programme from the 19th century, and kind of encapsulates a lot of what was going on in the politics as well. And street art, picking up street art often kind of gives a real sense of a time and place. So these works were shown a few times, but the last time they were really shown was in 2015 when I had a solo exhibition at Ginogli Art Gallery, and it was really nice to see them 10 years after I'd made them and kind of look back on this series. And it is really nice to work with galleries and museums so that you can really contextualise your work. Having worked on something so dark and heavy, I just wanted to do something totally different and completely challenge myself. And I had really enjoyed going to other places like Rome and Paris. And I just thought, well, actually, I was thinking about Hiroshige, and I think he was operating at a really interesting time. It was just before Japan opened up to the West. And at the time, so just before officially photography was introduced to Japan. And what he was making, this is his last great series, made in the last 2 years of his life. And they're called the 100 Famous Views of Edo, modern-day Tokyo. And they were released over a 2-year period. And they follow the seasons. But very subtly, they talk about a huge period, a huge shift in social feeling at the time, kind of moving from a traditional Japan to modern day Japan. And so it's very kind of subtle, but woven in to, there are obvious landmarks, but also very much everyday scenes in there. And I think that really appeals to me because I'm always interested in going to the places beyond the tourist trail to see how real people are living. And I think Hiroshige was doing this in this body of work. What I really love is that each of those images, each of those prints is recorded on a map, so they relate to a particular space. But of course he was using artistic license like all artists do, and creating these kind of lowered viewpoints, and also using a lot of, actually if you go back, because this is quite key, a lot of near-far technique, which is something I really love, by turning the composition, the format from landscape, which is traditional, to portrait. So it's a portrait of a city, and it creates this need for near-far elements. So you have enlarged elements in the foreground with the rest of the story, with a lot of space to fill behind. But I think it's a fantastic way of changing how you look at the world, and I really enjoy it as a way of composing my own images. So I thought, okay, I'm going to challenge myself. This is all about paring back, flattened colours, woodblock. How am I going to do that in photography? And I landed in Tokyo, and I was like, okay, this is all a bit different from what I know. But I had about 25 images from the series which I thought I could transpose into my reworkings, but I wasn't really sure. So I was kind of open to everything, looking around, having an idea of where I was going to go, but allowing events and points of interest to allow me to free flow as I walked around the city. And I took over 6,000 pictures, and so I had a huge image library to work with. So there's this point of taking the shots, which is short and intense and exhilarating and tiring. And then there's this really long period of about a year or so where I'm distilling and filtering through and looking through what I have, and then actually constructing my images back home in my studio. And that's when the story really comes out and becomes clear. But I think it's nice having those two parts. So I would categorize them into the different elements. And the people in them are people going about their everyday lives. They didn't know I was taking the photographs. And here I wanted to, the Bokashi cross-fading technique in the original woodblock print, I actually wanted to have an element of painting in it, so I kind of did watercolour backgrounds and then kind of incorporated that within my photo collage. And trying to find updates. So here with the original has the fish being weighed, and here this is from the fish market now, but of course everything's kind of so processed and sanitized, so it's in their plastic wrapping. And also here is one where it shows people, the commercial irises being grown and picked in the center of Tokyo. These days, those areas, it's Ueno Park, it's a beautiful area to go. People take photographs of flowers. So, you know, it's it's showing a different world. There's a different skyline as well, modern skyline. There are different motifs in the work. Here I use the idea of the bridge as literally a bridge between the past and the present. And I think the technique lends itself to always constantly looking at today, but through the filter of the past. So I'm kind of always interested in looking at the histories behind places. Had to have a night scene, so we've got the neon lights, you've got the vending machines, which are fantastic. Yeah. So each one told a different story, really. There were 10 of them in the collection. This one is all about good and bad fortune and the fleetingness of life. So you've got the cherry blossom, which is that symbol. There's a detail here which shows the fortune-telling papers which they tie onto the branch of a cherry tree. You tie the fortune-telling paper, if you have bad luck, onto a branch to try and avert that bad fortune. But here is, I was taking this photograph, so it was after the financial crash, so just after there was very evidently more homeless people. But there's a sense of dignity around that, but it was something I wanted to pick up on in the work. And here, this is about temple culture, which is, as well as the kind of spiritual side, is also a lot about having fun. So I was quite surprised to see that there was quite a lot of fairground rides right in temples. So, wanted to capture that. I had a show at the Daira Anglo-Japanese Foundation, which was great because that felt like a real endorsement. I think I always want to feel that my work kind of communicates with people, and the fact that the Daira Anglo-Japanese Foundation wanted to have the show and it was really well received was really heartening for me, and felt like, well, okay, I'm on the right track here with this. And actually this series of work has really toured the world because I had a show at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, and they bought the whole collection for their permanent collection. And it has gone on to tour. So it's been in the Japan Society Gallery in New York and in Singapore. And then I had a show at the Shizuoka Tokaido Hiroshige Museum in Japan. So, it's been shown a lot. It's been shown in Manchester Art Gallery, in Genogli Art Gallery. So it's lovely. You make a body of work and then it has this life. And hopefully it will continue to do so and kind of be received by new audiences. This was the show I had at Manchester Art Gallery. And what was lovely about that was that they loaned the original Hiroshige prints from the British Museum. So we were able to see this direct link with the original Old Master, which is fantastic. And what I love about his work is they're so luminous. They're brocade prints and the colours are just wonderful. So they shine as much as my light boxes do, but they work really, really well together. So that was a real joy to work on that show. And working with museums to really think about the space and how you can make the best of your work. So we kind of very carefully thought about how to present it in this kind of darkened space so that the light boxes really shine out almost like jewels. And that was really an important part of the whole process of exhibiting, because there's one part which is the making, but another is presenting and sharing that with the world. I wanted to talk about Sohn because he's had a big influence on me. And I was invited by Pitshanger Manor to have an exhibition in Sohn's former country residence in Ealing, which I don't know if you've ever been to the Sohn Museum. In London, in Lincoln's Inn Fields. So that was Sohn's home in London. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely full of all, he was an avid collector, full of all, you can see here in the dome room, full of all casts of Roman and Egyptian and Greek artifacts. But actually his former home was empty. So it had all the Sohnian elements, the skylights and the beautiful domes and alcoves, but empty, so we could fill the work. And so what I wanted to do, this is a painting I've known about for many years, and it just lends itself to my style of working. So this idea of, this was Joseph Gandy, who was Sir John Soane's architectural illustrator. And they worked together for 40 years, and it was a really fantastic, one of the most successful kind of architectural kind of partnerships, in that Gandy was able, he was called the English Piranesi, and he was able to work up Soane's quite workmanlike drawings into these incredible visions full of light and drama. And this piece shows all of Soane's executed buildings shown as models in a room. I mean, just the most incredible concept for a piece of work. So what I did, this is looking at the Bank of England. This is his most famous project. He also introduced the idea of skylights into museum spaces. So here you can see, this is at Dulwich Picture Gallery, but actually it's been used in museums ever since as a brilliant way of bringing light, non-directional light into a space. But also private homes that he built. And this shows the kind of construction process. So I contacted owners of Soane properties, and I asked them if I could come and photograph their places, and I wanted to kind of build, it's almost like a condition report, 200 years on, this is what exists of Soane's architecture now. And woven into it, of course, are other stories, such as, you can see the K2 telephone box, which Gilbert Scott was a trustee of the Soane Museum when he was asked to design it. So that's in there, because it is, and it's directly referencing Tombs family stone. So this idea of the four-cornered dome, which he used on his family tombstone. But he used it in all his buildings. Can you see here, again, you've got this four-cornered dome. So we see it all around us in the telephone box. So that's his legacy. In the original, you have Soane at work with all of his tools of his trade, his elevations, his plans, his models. And these are my tools of the trade in order to do this. So it's my map, my guide, my letters of permission, my visitors' passes, all of the things. So it's kind of building up that story. This just shows how many buildings there are in there. And this shows it as it was at Pitshanger Manor. I was then asked if I wanted to have an exhibition at the Sir John Soane's Museum. So what a fantastic honour and opportunity to actually show the work in the space where Gandy had originally painted the picture. And of course, I was always aware of this other painting, which is the companion piece. So it's all of Soane's architectural projects that were never built. So the idea had been in my mind for a while about how to do it when the buildings had never been built, because everything I do is taken from the real world, so something that has been built. But anyway, what I decided to do was think of neoclassical architecture as a kit of parts. So it's the columns, it's the pediments, it's the domes, and travel around the UK photographing neoclassical architecture by other architects of the time, and then reconstructing them. So here's my plan of where I went. And then you can see here how I've taken different bits from different buildings and then merged them together to try and make them look like Soane's Triumphal Arch or his British Senate House, which was never built. And in a way, it was trying to, here again, taking a Palladium bridge from Prior Park in Bath, adding more columns to try and make it look like his original idea. And then setting it in this hybrid, romanticised landscape to kind of almost realise the projects that were never built. And in amongst them are people photographing and recording with their video, with their taking selfies and photographing. There's a drone in there. So there's lots of kind of modern updates in there. And this is how it looked at the Soane Museum. So again, wanting to get this idea of a really darkened space, almost cave-like, with then this luminosity kind of really shining through. So you'll see here, there's the two stoneworks, but then there's also another work by Piranesi. And these are probably, I mean, I think by doing the stoneworks, it made me realise, again, it kind of increased my level of ambition of what I could do in one piece. And I think they're incredible, Piranesi's capriccio. So they are taking the idea of the Appian Way in Rome, but completely over-embellishing it. I mean, it never looked like that. But what an exciting space he's created. And I wanted to have a go doing that, kind of creating this dialogue between London and Rome, but also using it as a vehicle to really talk about our times and thinking about London and what it's becoming, the development of London. So you can see all the kind of new buildings going up behind, and within the work there's other places like Marco Polo House, which was a postmodern house, office, which was built in the 80s, but already in the picture it's being demolished. So it's kind of like there's things going up, there's things crumbling. It's, I guess it's a kind of warning against architecture hubris in a way, and also a reminder that empires can collapse. And, there's the Roman remnants and rubble, but also there's the rubble around London as well. So there is a kind of political edge to some of these capriccio that I was working on. So you can see here a detail. This shows what the actual prints look like in the books. They're over they're a double-page spread, and they're full of real chiaroscuro, so they're light and dark, and they're really etched in with such intensity and power. And there's a real sense, I don't know, that people have of ruin lust, of this kind of love of looking at rubble and memento mori. And this piece I call Ghost Towers, which is another reworking. And I wanted it to reflect more of Britain in general, not just London. So it's a tour around the UK, but you've got elements from Highgate Cemetery and the necropolis in Glasgow. But there's almost this divide between the foreground and then what's going on behind. And it's, again, this kind of hubris in a way of all these towers going up, and there was this boom. But it was for a lot of the buildings were for overseas investors who actually then, in light of Brexit, were kind of turning their back on Britain, and they were being left empty, so they were called ghost towers. And yet people in London were on the kind of trying to couldn't get on the property ladder, and there was a lot of homelessness. So there is quite a lot of stories going in here. Everything, I guess, I can put in there is I've choreographed it specially. So you've got all the hyperbole of property developers speak. And then you've got like Empire Way there. So, it is talking a lot about the state of Britain and at the cusp of this turning point in history and what state it's in, really. And this is another one that kind of talks a little about that as well. But also basing it not just in Whitehall, but also in Liverpool. So, so it's the first and second cities of the British Empire. And so there's a lot of reference to Britain's maritime history, and perhaps, the smoking embers on the left kind of suggest that perhaps all is not well. It might look like this impressive citadel, but actually behind the scenes, things are kind of crumbling a bit, and not. There's a lot of uncertainty and inequality, growing inequality of wealth. I'm going to talk very briefly about some public commissions I've done, just because it's quite interesting when I do, as I say, generally I follow a flow of ideas, but then from time to time I have the opportunity to work to a brief, and this was for Manchester Art Gallery, and what was really nice was I worked with a painting which is the most popular painting in their collection by Adolphe Villette, and it shows the town square. And it's at an interesting time because you've got a kind of a modern motor car, but also a horse and carriage taxi. So it kind of shows kind of Manchester at a pivotal point of turning. And what I did in mine was trying to kind of capture the same buildings, the same statues, but how time has passed and it's a much more multicultural place now. I was commissioned by the States of Jersey in 2012 to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee River pageant, and that was a huge honour because, again, and there's a whole tradition of artists commemorating big historic moments, and so I was on the boat and I was able to capture what I saw and then create an artwork which I knew was going to be on public display, and it's still on display in the States Building. So here, this is my final composition. So again, it's taking lots and lots of photographs and reconstructing it. So in the foreground, there's lots of elements actually from Jersey, around Elizabeth Harbour. You can see the distinctive granite. I wanted to bring Jersey into the scene and then have the view of the river, colliding the two spaces together. I did a series, I did a commission for Rathbones, and they wanted it for their headquarters in Finsbury Park. They had, Finsbury Square in London. They had a new boardroom in which they wanted to have a piece that incorporated all the places where they had offices, which includes Jersey. So Jersey's building is there. And I had some help from a family member to take the photograph of that. But here it shows the key to all of those buildings. But that was kind of fun, kind of creating into a Canaletto landscape. And then there it is in their boardroom. And finally, in terms of commissions, this is one that I've just done this year. And it's to do with Eric Revilius, who is a painter who painted a lot around the 1930s, painted a lot of scenes around East Sussex, which is where I live now. And so what they wanted to do, because it's their centenary year and they're also hosting the Turner Prize, which opened last night, they wanted to kind of use it as an opportunity to promote East Sussex. And so they commissioned 4 artists to respond to 4 different works that Eric Revilius made about Newhaven. So Newhaven is just 10 miles along the coast from Eastbourne, and it's quite an industrial area. It's probably the next big boom place. It's the next place that artists are going to move to because it's still affordable. But it is also where the boat from Newhaven to Dieppe comes and goes. And he captured the kind of the sense of excitement in the 1935 of the boat leaving harbour, kind of at twilight with the lights shining. And in my recreation, I tried to find where he was, but I also incorporated different elements that brought it up to date. So the new ferry is perhaps not quite as beautiful, but it still has a real sense of drama when it comes in. It's so exciting to see, and how the scale of it in relation to the surroundings. And it's a big industrial area, so there's the scrap heap and the recycling plant. But I also wanted to capture it in this exciting time of day, that kind of twilight day that I've used before, and very much place it in the here and now. So you have the bunting from the King's coronation this year, so it very much marks it as being something that's this year. And this shows me, it's fantastic making something that scale, because my works, I work on a large file, and I guess in a way that's the artwork, and then in theory, it can be printed at any scale. And because there's so many details in my work to explore and find, it does lend itself to being that big. But I think that's the biggest it's ever been. So it's like 6 by 5 meters. But I made it. I mean, it could be 50 meters. So, but it was wonderful seeing that. And I think actually what has been really, really heartening is that when people, we had the opening celebration and people said, oh, you've captured our town. And for me, that was the biggest compliment I could have got, because I think as an artist, I want my work to communicate and to resonate with people. And if people can see something about where they live and relate to it and engage with it and get enjoyment from it, then I think that's my job done, and I've done a good job. So it was really lovely just to kind of get the kind of local responses. I could go on and on and on, but I think maybe this is a good place to stop, because I've done so much work. Actually, I realised that it's actually quite hard to condense it into an hour's talk, but I hope it kind of gets over the idea that my work takes time. I try and reflect the world around me. I take the built world as my inspiration, but then what I'm trying to do is construct a story that will actually kind of, I don't know, communicate, or people will get a response to, that reflects issues that are happening in the world around. And as time goes on, I realise that there are particular landmarks and snapshots that my work has captured, which I didn't really realise at the time, but it's a nice kind of consequence of working over a long period of time. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have and talk about more recent projects that might come up, but maybe this is a good place to stop.
Wow, thank you, Emily. My head is absolutely full to the brim. But please, we love people to ask questions. I've got a microphone. If anybody wants to get the ball rolling, please let me know and I'll pass it over.
I don't need the microphone.
Okay.
I was just going to ask about when your last picture really kind of summed it up for me in terms of the scale of the work when it's actually presented. So when you're actually starting, you obviously have no conceptual idea as to how big these things could become. Is that hard for you, or is that does that motivate you a little bit more? And also, do you confine yourself to a set proportion at the beginning of the job? Because you've got so much information and so many images, it must be easy to just let it run away. So it just goes on and on and on, because you're always trying to add something new in.
Well, I think I'm helped by the fact that I use the old master as my guide. So the composition is kind of there, and then I'm using it as an armature in which to construct my image over the top. So that kind of gives me quite strict parameters within which my own creativity can emerge. So that's one sense. In terms of the scale, quite often I think very carefully about what size the original was. And so if you remember the Manchester Commission, it was quite important for me, that I made exactly the same size as the original, so that they sit side by side. It's in Manchester Art Gallery now, and they are exactly the same size. But other works, so the Hiroshige prints, are quite small, and so I decided to increase the size for those, because I think it works as a light box. It's like a window into another world. And what I'm doing, I kind of make templates physically make templates, and you can just tell when it's the right size. So I have to think about what space it's going to be in and that kind of thing. But actually, in reality, as I say, it is a file that could be printed any size. So, it's fantastic when you have the opportunity to blow something up really big. I mean, I'd love to see the sewn one blown up really big. I mean, sometimes in exhibitions they do that and they have it as a wallpaper. So, you know, there's the ability because there's so much information in there. But I think somehow, even though I'm kind of making, in the Photoshop, you work with layers, so it's almost like a real kind of collage but done on the computer screen. So you're cutting your elements out, you're sticking onto the background and you're building up layers. And I can work with several thousand layers that I'm merging as I go along. But there is a moment when you know it's done somehow. Yeah. A lot gets taken out and I think, oh, I worked 3 days doing that, but it gets cut at the end. So you do edit, you have to edit.
I was going to say one of the things I particularly like is this kind of idea that often the original master's images are very distant in a sense, that you feel no connection, but you bring them back to life by some of the most ordinary, simple, everyday details, and I think that's a really interesting kind of contrast in a way. Yeah,
I mean, I guess I love the idea of the ordinary, everyday objects, paraphernalia in the streets, and those are the things that you connect with, and it kind of propels it into the 21st century. So you can learn a bit about art history or about how society was and how a lot of the themes actually are the same. I mean, as in the Tower of Babel, I have made, I couldn't show you anymore, but I have made, you can look on my website, I've made lots of Towers of Babel. Each one has a different story to tell. But you know, it's a way, absolutely, as you say.
Just to ask if you've done a book, because what you've done tonight is, and your explanation and description of your work is fascinating. It's incredibly articulate. I just wondered whether you're planning to put all this in a book about your work and about your method.
Oh, that would be wonderful. It's it's all about funding, but yeah, no, it would be great. I've had some people write about my work, and it is fantastic when a writer with a critical eye kind of writes about your work, and it would be lovely to have a book one day. I've had exhibition catalogues, but to actually have a monograph with everything in, because actually I've just shown you a fraction of, there's so many more series actually, so it would be really nice, because it's you know, to see that development and to see the links and recurring themes would be great. So one day.
You mentioned your sculptural training, and I just wondered what materials you used, what sort of scale of sculpture you produced before you had that Damascene moment in London and took up photography and as a way of furthering what you were doing. But what sort of sculpture were you making, and how has that informed your later career?
I think when I was on my undergraduate, it's interesting, I almost had a reversal, but I had an experience which maybe you can pick up on with all this kind of sense of fear. So I had a bad experience in the city when I was on my foundation, and what it led me to do was to move somewhere that was very safe. And there was something about Canterbury which had this protective wall around it. And I made work which was about my personal space, basically. I was building, now when I look at it, I realise I was building armour. And so it was very personal. So it was about, here I am, this is my space. And they were constructed though, they took a long time to make. So I think the elements that have continued are the fact that my work takes a long time to make. I enjoy that. They're always made up of lots of elements. So I was building up, they were using plaster, using cast glass. I had a piece that was at Corbière for 28 years. Unfortunately, got removed earlier this year. But that was, that was to do with how kind of my space around me, but it was also looking at natural forms and rhythms. So it was made out of cast concrete, lots of elements, gradually getting smaller, like a shell shape. So it's quite different kind of work, quite internalised. And I think it was only on moving to London that I was ready to open up And that's when the external influence of the city impacted on me. And I did start by making work which was combining object and image. So I kind of made maps. So I did a map. I drew around my veins, actually, on my hand and torso that reminded me of places I'd lived. So when you're a young student, you move around a lot. And so there were lots of different places. And I was kind of using it like memory maps and then blowing them up really big. So the first photograph I ever did was 5 by 6 meters or something. And they were blown up. The sections I enlarged in the darkroom. And then I stuck them onto pieces of a jigsaw, so it was like a freestanding jigsaw. But you can see the idea then that it is something that is built up, constructed. All of those ideas, they are the common theme. So my practice has changed, but actually it's about the craftsmanship. It's about spending time with something. It's about the journey I have in the making process and how it informs the story.
I'm just fascinated how you deal with light. I mean, was it very difficult to get the light right for the Manchester picture? I mean,
Okay.
Or does Photoshop allow you so much to play?
It does.
Paint?
I mean, of course. So Photoshop is the most amazing tool, but it's the skills that you bring to it. So I bring to it a painter's eye. So I love playing with light. As I say, I try and shoot the work in flat lights, so when there's cloud cover. And that means that I can create all of that highlight, all of the shadows. So I've got complete control. And it is like painting with pixels. So I actually enjoy that bit almost the most. It's like, so I get all the elements in and then I work on it. It's almost like getting the lighting right in a space, you know, so those final elements which pulls it together and makes it feel homogeneous. So I really enjoy actually constructing the light in my images, but then I really enjoy how using the light physically to illuminate the work is also an important part of it, and how its part in presenting the work and the experience of the work. Which is similar to looking at it on a screen, to be honest. If you turned all the lights off here, that's kind of, the same. It's this being illuminated from behind. Has a real sense of drama and theatre and staging, which is all very, important in the work itself.
What would you say is going to be your next ambition after the work you've done so far?
Well, yeah, so okay, so after this, I did, COVID happened, so that was a massive thing, because actually, I haven't shown you this work, but I have a gallery in Hong Kong which took me to Hong Kong in 2017 and 18, and I made a Babel tower about Hong Kong. Now that relationship with them took me to mainland China, and I did a project called Mirror Cities, which was about the start and end, using Marco Polo as the start and end of the Silk Road. So a lot of the way, it's a kind of combination of Venice and ancient and modern counterpart locations in China, and finding synergies and connections between the two places. And I worked on that project for 2 years, but during it, COVID happened, and the whole story, which was meant to be about globalization, mass, tourism, just everything so it went from busy scenes to deserted scenes, and I followed that in the work, and I've had exhibitions that I haven't seen, I haven't been able to go to, I haven't seen the work. So all of that, I had to reset, well, what am I going to do? And I ended up doing a body of work which was about landscapes. If you remember the Hiroshige Japanese woodblock prints, maybe I can flick forward to them, but it might take too long. But I did a set, and they're all exploring my local landscape in East Sussex, which is where I live now. I've lived there for 8 years, having moved out of London. And so taking the idea of the vertical format and the near-far to have a conversation about landscape in England, and about our human interventions with the landscape. So there's elements of kind of the environment, climate change, the fragility of nature, the celebration of its beauty, sometimes our careless interventions in the landscape. So it kind of did move into a more kind of landscapey feel, and actually what I'm working on now, which again is a year-long project, I'm looking back. So if you remember the Bruegel Tower of Babel that I showed you earlier on, he also, in the same room in Vienna, in the Kunsthistorische, there is also his seasons, and I'm working on that. So it's about English landscape, constructing landscape, following the seasons, as a story about the landscape today. So that is what I'm working on. So it's a kind of landscape. I didn't include it because it's more landscape rather than architecture, but I'm interested in these things. But again, it is about human intervention in the landscape, how the landscape's ordered and controlled, very carefully managed. So all of that is feeding into the work at the moment. So that will keep me busy for another year.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Oh.
That's fantastic.